So thank you everyone for joining in today, and welcome to Moving Forward by Looking Back, the Re-Uncovery process as a meaningfulness approach to mania and psychosis. I'm Andrea Gray. And a little bit about me. I have my Bachelor of Science in Cell and Molecular Biology. I was trained as a peer support worker as well as a RAP facilitator. I'm a self-published author, and I was diagnosed bipolar 1 with psychotic features. One of the other terms I created to describe that is omnipolar, because I don't think it's only bidirectional, it's like every direction. And the hashtag is to symbolize that the word bipolar to me is a way that we can find each other and join together in our neurodiversity. I'm also an expert by experience because of my diagnosis. I also see myself as a channeler, as well as a possibilities and language seer. So I don't see visions per se. I actually have near aphantasia, where I don't have any imagination in my head at all. That's just a little bit about me. And I'm just really happy and honored to be here at the ISPS conference in solidarity with everyone. And to go with solidarity, we're going to have a solidarity experience here right now. Dun, da, da, da. Okay. Together now, no matter what our background, whether it's clinical or lived experience or family member, we have just seen something extraordinary that isn't quite there, but our brain is creating that. So we're starting off on the same page, if you will. Oops. And so let's start with a question. Have you ever had an experience or a message that felt meaningful? Or if you're a clinician or a family member, have you witnessed anything that looked like someone was going through an extraordinary experience that had meaning for them, and that you could see that meaning or wanted to maybe help them with that meaning? And I'm guessing a lot of us have had this type of experience, and I'm using the word meaningful. Meaning just means it's a subjective thing. Like what's meaningful to me isn't necessarily meaningful to you. So it's very subjective. And so what is re-uncovery? Basically what it boils down to is that we can go back and re-uncover our extraordinary state experiences, and we can learn from them after the states are over. And many of us are already doing this in many ways. I love to play with language, so I created the word re-uncovery to indicate that. And as a definition, let's explore this: a self-directed, intentional meaningfulness approach to uncover the information and experiences from previous extraordinary states, plus daily life, to facilitate learning, understanding, and meaning-making, to catalyze adaptation to future extraordinary states through harvesting, practicing, and embodying one's human potential. So that's a mouthful, and we're going to go into all of that. So why did I start to do re-uncovery? Well, basically, I was diagnosed in 2011. I had 5 hospitalizations up to 2016. And during my 5th hospitalization, I experienced a psychiatrist who didn't want to collaborate with me and wanted to put me on high-dose antipsychotic maintenance treatment, which in my previous 5 years of recovery, I never needed that. So I didn't assume that I needed that. And I was luckily able to switch doctors because of a fortunate situation, but I was fortunate. It's not necessarily a rule. So I decided, or I realized, that I wouldn't necessarily call for help next time. I thought, I'm not necessarily going to call for that kind of help if I might not get helped at all. And it'll just sort of negate all the good recovery journey that I had had to that point. So I tried a different approach. So we're going to talk about re-uncovery, and this will make more sense as we go along. We're going to talk about the taboo that we need to break, or maybe we already have. Again, acknowledging that everyone's in different places in the journey, and also the recovery process, and the approach of Re-Uncovery, sorry, I think I said recovery, Re-Uncovery, the evident, which means what is evident to oneself. And we'll also find a bit of research evidence to bridge and have clues to that along the way. And we're also going to introduce a bit of a frame play or a framework for this process. So the idea that there's value in extraordinary states, maybe called psychosis or mania, dates back to the ancient Greeks, probably beyond that, as well as in this example here, there's a poster of the value of psychotic experience at Esalen. I think Alan Watts was there, and that was in the late 60s. And since there's no question mark there, I think they were talking about the value of it and not saying there is or isn't value. And along with value, or the other side of value, is the idea that there's risks in exploring these things. And that risk, I believe, has created the common talking point that one lacks insight into one's illness. And that talking point is a fear-based talking point, and it introduces a taboo that we can't speak in these ways. It indicates that we can't speak in these ways, and if we do, we lack insight into our illness. That's a form of gaslighting. If you look on Wikipedia under gaslighting, they actually have a section for psychiatric gaslighting. And unfortunately, but when we take that on, we self-gaslight ourselves, which might be a bigger thing even than the idea of self-stigma. And we also don't trust ourselves. So this is all fear. And when we fear, also we can't learn. There's lots of studies that show when there's too much cortisol, we can't learn. So when we give ourselves permission to break that taboo, to stop self-gaslighting, and I'm not saying we haven't already done that. We're kind of going through this in a linear fashion since we're here in space and time right now. And it's a paradigm shift to do that. And it introduces a positive bias. And that's not to say that it's all positive. It means that now we are approaching it in a way that is meaningful to us, and we're starting to trust in our own subjectivity in order to do so. And by doing that, we can gain insight into our experiences and our extraordinary states. And we can trust our magic. And that's not a typo. Like, we can trust we are magic. So since there's a lot of meaning, and you can say a different word than meaning, you can say, richness, spirituality, spirit, energy, whatever. We need an approach that goes along with that. And 3.5 years into my journey, I found this book, The Spiritual Gift of Madness by Seth Farber, in a bookstore. And I read it, and I opened the book, and on page 3, there's a partial quote here by Will Hall, which is, mental health conditions can be made into something beautiful. And that's at the very beginning of the book. And right away, I realized that I had found that I wasn't the only one who thought these ways, which is how I originally thought when I had my original extraordinary state experience in 2011. But I just sort of brushed it aside to do recovery for 3.5 years. So shortly after this, I actually went to Esalen and for a conference called Revisioning Madness. And I met one of my best friends who is in California, but I call him my brain twin because we think the same. So how can doing Re-Uncovery, which we'll go into a process of that, how can it facilitate moving forward? Well, good news from the frontiers of neuroscience. We are adapted to adapt, and that's Bo Lotto in the book Deviate, the Science of Seeing Differently, which is a positive thing, right? When the neuroscientists talk about it. So that's why I love to read what neuroscientists are saying and people in the human potential movement and the frontiers of science, and extrapolate that to my experiences, because it speaks volumes compared to other reductionist frameworks. So one of the things we're going to explore here is dialogue. And in creating this presentation, I realized that dialogue it's not necessarily the only way to do Re-Uncovery, especially when one looks at the current definition that is a living definition, and it can be adapted to one's own uniqueness. So here's a quote by a physicist, Dr. David Bohm, one of my favorite thinkers. He says, even one person can have a sense of dialogue within himself if the spirit of the dialogue is present. Oops. And I took that to mean, along with other parts in that book, that you can talk with yourself if there's nobody to talk with about things in the way that you wish to. And so we're getting into the process. And this first, the themes of the process of re-uncovery and self-dialogue as well in particular are harvest, practice, and embody. And it's the heart, it's the pump. It's always happening. It's not linear. It's like maybe a spiral. It's not, what it is what we're saying is the harvest, there's a source of information. There's a source of experiences, the extraordinary experiences. And, say some people have special messages. I do for sure. And we're going to look at a practice in order to harvest that information. And by doing this practice, that the practice is an embodiment, and it's also allowing the information source and meaning to inform the embodiment. So it's a virtuous cycle is what it is. And so I already mentioned that we're talking about the information and extraordinary experiences. So there's basically, through the process of extraordinary states, there's a lot of information. Information is just, I'm not talking about, reading a book. I'm saying like the whole of reality is information is what they're saying now. And it can get misencoded because of the overload. So we can't properly process it or integrate it or put it in the brain or in our being where it's meant to go, because there's just too much, too fast, too chaotic, too non-linear, too non-spatial, non-temporal. So through a process called self-dialogue, which we're going to go into, we can convert that into a field of meaning and context in real time. All it takes really is our time and attention to convert that in real time at the speed of daily life instead of the speed of extraordinary states. And, it's scalable in that it's totally a enclosed process. And that doesn't mean it doesn't feed into manifestation in daily life. It's totally self-reliant. And so that means it's all within our circle of influence. And again, we're trying to see if we can turn this vicious cycle, as it could be, into a virtuous cycle. And it's a participatory process. So one thing a lot of us already probably do is document. We write things down. We journal, we maybe do poetry. There's so many things we can do, and we by writing them down. Now, the difference here a little bit is that now we are writing them down with the intention to build on it and make more meaning of it, rather than say, maybe resist it when we have the approach of, oh, it's bad, it's illness, it's this and that. So once we have had this permission to really explore, the approach is different. So what we document might be a little different, and the energy behind why we're doing it is different. And so the main process that I used, and there could be many processes, this is the one that I created or unfolded within myself, was a self-dialogue. And when I talked about how I was sort of desperate to not go back to the hospital, that's what fueled it. I just started talking with myself on my phone, based on the things I wrote down during the day. And so I didn't necessarily go back into my old writing, which I had a ton, but old stuff would likely come up, and I would just talk about it. And then after I talked about the insights one by one, I would watch it. And so this is a a little bit more about it. There's so much that could be written about it, but the approach to the self-dialogue in a way is to really be in a place of not knowing. And by doing that, one is able to connect with the unknown, or that unknown extraordinary state information, not in a way that involves trying. And it's also suspension of belief. And we use the video as a witness, or like a moving mirror. And using metaphor, which a lot of us use, there's many speech aspects we use, and we can use all of those, but this time we're talking with ourselves on video. And so it's a spontaneous speaking, like we're speaking with nature or the universe or higher consciousness or a different version of ourselves. It's something other than our normal circular thought loops, and just using questioning and wondering and curiosity and awe as an approach. So this is a little bit of what it looks like. I've talked about most of it. So document things during the day. And then this part goes together here, where you start by kind of looking at it with a relaxed gaze, just getting yourself relaxed, not reading it with like the focal vision per se. And then talking about it insight by insight. And then elaborating or expanding or extrapolating on it without overthinking or second guessing. It's just sort of like adding in the next sentence that might come in through vocalization versus writing. Because the writing is like just writing the insights during the day and not necessarily having time to expand upon them and writing at that moment. And expanding on the voice is a little different. So, and then later on, this you can do whenever, is you watch the video and you document any new insights you have from watching yourself speak. And watching yourself speak, you get a lot more information than say journaling. And you can write down more insights. And then now you have those insights plus whatever you write the next day or whenever, and you talk about them whenever you have a chance. So it's all like when you want, however long you want, if you want. It's all self-directed. And so how does this work? Well, here's a clue that extrapolates well to the last slide of the process. If somebody says his or her name to you, it stores in one place in your brain. If you say it back, it redistributes to 2. If you write it down, it goes to 3. If you look at what you wrote, it gets shared with a 4th. The more places related information is stored in the brain, the more integrated and useful the information becomes, and easier it is to recall and utilize as a resource. So you can see how many different layers are in the self-dialogue process, as our here and Don Estes, neuroscientist, is saying that it helps to integrate the information and make it more useful. And by expanding, we'll see how it can become useful. So again, about the encoding, it's just misencode, overload information. And then through this process, we can re-encode it through this meaning-making process, which is in regular-ish consciousness in daily life, and move it through that, because in that state we couldn't process it, and now we're processing it in daily life when we have time at our leisure. And so the approach is expansionist. We're not doing reductionism here. We're just expanding. And this, by building this big meshwork of meaning through this triple extrapolation, we're crowding out the pathography at a rate that we don't necessarily create. It's a matter of our meanings taking precedence in our mind and our being and our spirit. And it eventually crowds out what's not helpful. And it's not abolitionist per se, but it might abolish it within ourselves. When I had that experience, I wanted to make that kind of psychiatry practice where there's no collaboration obsolete. And I wanted to make it obsolete, at least for myself. I didn't know how I would make it obsolete for other people. And it's a human rights aligned approach because, We have a right to give ourselves permission to speak in these ways within ourselves. And that's what is within our circle of influence. A lot of other things are within our circle of concern, but what's within our circle of influence is like self-dialogue is a circle of influence process. And it has influences beyond just, making meaning in one's spare time. And the open dialogue approach is proposed and spoke about as a human rights aligned approach. And so to go with that, self-dialogue is also, and it's self-directed, self-authored, self-learning, self-recognition, which means like I don't need anyone else to affirm the meanings that I've made. And in my experience, because I did so much self-dialogue, I didn't need to necessarily affirm my own meanings because it was more about the process of meaning making than any particular meaning. So self-integration, it's intra-subjective. Oh, here's a little video. I might have to change the settings. So this is just a 1 minute-ish clip. Let's see if I can not screw this up. Okay. In the spirit of daily self-dialogue, I will talk to myself today. It's possible I could spiral into a dangerous place, but I'm not sure if it's because I've done so much self-dialogue in order to help me through this. Because right now I feel alone, and I feel grief, because I don't want to go back to the psych ward. But the point of this video here is to show that 9 days later, I'm back on my feet. And that crisis was just as bad as the one I experienced last year, where I ended up in the psych ward and different care units for 33 days. So this time, 0 days. And that could be a big turning point. And it's not like it was any easier, it wasn't. But it wasn't made worse.
So I'm on the train to California, on the way to living my dream. I guess I'm already living the dream because I'm already in California.
Tomorrow I should be discharged from the hospital. And I think this is part of what was meant to happen. I haven't had this happen the entire 3 years I was talking with myself on video. Haven't had this happen. Oh, right. I hope people heard it. If not, I will tell you. Why is it ding-donging now here? Okay. So yeah, I talked to myself for 3 years, and that was a total of 700 hours of video. And so that's also 700 hours of watching myself, watching the video, and that doesn't include the writing and all that too. So it was more than that, and so during that clip, I showed a little snippet of the first time I avoided the hospital. And I'm not sharing this as that's the purpose of this per se. Like I went back to the hospital 3 years later when I really needed to. But at that point before, I was going every 8 months. So it's just an example of what self-dialogue can do. It also helped me live my dream because it was a turning point. I was able to go to California for 5 months, 3 weeks after that crisis happened, because it was handled in a different way. I was able to handle it in a different way. And I was rehospitalized in 2019. Wasn't that big of a deal. I knew I needed to go. I had stopped talking with myself, and I was trying to live more in, I guess, reality. And I got a bit excited about that. And since then, I haven't been rehospitalized. So I guess it's been 4.5 years now. And that's the longest I've gone. And with the self-dialogue, I haven't experienced any cognitive decline or worsening of symptoms or episode frequency. My brain is actually a lot sharper than it's ever been. I'm able to do many projects at the same time and keep track of everything. And at the same time, ideas and things and special messages, they're not intrusive. I just write them down. And then I talk about them, or I write about them, or I do something with them later on. So it's harm reduction against, I guess, straying from functioning that needs to be done. as well as a lot of other things. It's an intentional container for it, because of the permission to create the meaning. And it also has created a lot of context. So another word for meaning is context. Tons of context for creative projects. For example, I think at one point I did the transcripts of all my videos, and it was enough for like 10 books. Not that I would do that, but that's just an example. And then this also helps with all other conversations with friends, family. One starts to be able to, or I was able to discern like what to share with people, what not to, and when. And like when I had this meaningfulness approach within myself, it made things better, as well as like if there is ever open dialogue, like I'll be really good at it. If I'm in a crisis and I get open dialogue, that would be lovely. And I also feel like it creates like a wisdom tradition within oneself, or perhaps more so even between peers, and hopefully in collaboration with the clinical side of things too in the future. I've gone to some of the other talks and presentations virtually, and there's just so many great people creating courses and everything, and that's amazing. We need more of that. And so let's talk just a bit about meaning. And this is another quote by Dr. David Bohm. But if meaning itself is a key part of reality, then whenever society, the individual, and their relationships are seen to mean something different from what they did before, a fundamental change has already taken place. No special choice or active will is further required for this to happen. So I extrapolate that to this context to mean that the meaning itself, the process of making meaning, the self-dialogue or whatever it is the action. That nothing necessarily other than that needs to happen, because the meaning and the context, it informs how we see, it informs what we do, the process of making the meaning. And so David Bohm says no special choice or active will is further required for this to happen. Meaning making is actually, in a way, like an inverse process of will, because will is how we've been conditioned, if you will. And here's another bridge. So there was a study they did where people were seen to make more meaning if they had the trait of that. So persons higher in trait self-awareness are more likely to seek out and find meaning compared to those lower in trait self-awareness. So in the study, well, I already described that part, but I hope at this point we can see that by being aware of the trait, by being self-aware of the trait, to be able not only to seek out and find meaning, but to create it in a participatory observation with, past experience, present moment, and future insights or special messages and experiences. It will be more likely to do that. And again, giving ourselves permission to do that, or additional permission if we've already engaged that in a lot of other different ways. There are so many other ways to do it. I found with the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic aspect of writing, speaking on video, and then watching it and writing, there's just so much more information when one sees oneself speak. And like I did those 1,400 hours, and if I would have talked with a therapist for 1,400 hours, if I pretend that's $100 an hour, that's $140,000, right? That's a lot. So I did a lot of my self-dialogue, and it's helped me in a lot of ways. And one more point about meaning here. There was a study where, and I found this study referenced in the book Choices in Recovery, which is a great book by Craig Wagner. And in the study, they they tested people to see if they're higher in hedonic well-being, which is like pleasure without meaning, really. Like they said, oh, I'm just here for the party type happiness. And meaning was eudaimonic well-being. There's more meaning felt in life. And they found when they did a test for gene expression for a certain immunity cascade, that those who were just experiencing the happiness had the same gene expression as people experiencing chronic adversity. Whereas with the meaning, there is a beneficial gene expression pattern. And both references are in the handout that I put in the sketch thing, sked. And so it made me think, like, is meaning after mania and psychosis essential? Because if I build up a meshwork of meaning within myself and with the help of other, therapists, and then I'm bringing that meaning with me into the next experience, and that meaning will inform perhaps the happiness not being so happy, it also being informed by the meaning that I've created, as well as the way I'm able to understand things in real time in meaningful ways because of that meaning. And so to go with that, this is in addition to everything that's already available, like recovery, everything that one needs to access. It's not in opposition to that at all. And I was thinking about the term mad, like we're mad people. So I just made this meaning awareness dialogue. I couldn't stop adding things in. And so now we're going to talk a bit about the frame play or framework or scaffolding. So far, the way I've put it together for myself is 5 stages with 13 total levels. And you can think of it, or we can think of it as the things I'm building up. So I took RAP. I'm a RAP facilitator. It's a great program. And there's one section called When Things Are Breaking Down. So this general frame play is to kind of parse out more steps for the upside of things and the things I'm building up. And so in this example, we're going to talk about like from creativity to creative accomplishment. There's so many other things it could be used for. But in the like personality research or psychological research, they talk about creative accomplishment. It's a term. And people who's like me, who are diagnosed bipolar, are criticized for having creativity without creative accomplishment. And so this is a way to regame it and kind of put it to remission it. So sometimes we feel like we have a mission. So this is to remission it rather than try to get symptoms in remission. And, we can unfold our gifts and potential and possibilities. And I heard someone talk about like how, once the crisis happens, it has to be, ourselves need to be built again anew. I went through a huge period of grieving the loss of my former self. I realized there's no way I could go back to that. So like to recover that is to build something new. And that's what Re-Uncovery is. And you can design your own variation and language. So, giving somebody access to Canva with a bipolar diagnosis, this is what happens. I created this meaning body buddy. So these little icons were used before for witnessing, for speaking, the harvest practice and body pump and the writing. And of course, it's all grounded in listening. Self-dialogue, triple extrapolation. So we've done all this here. And then this is the rest of him or her or them. And so we're not going to talk about all of it in detail. We're just going to go over it to build this little framework, game work thing. And so this was me in my first mania in 2011. Man, I was like putting things on the walls. I was doing all sorts of things, but I was writing things down. I wrote out 700 pages like this, 8.5 by 11s. It says, was the guy I met today good? Do I need to walk more slowly? Why does it feel like I was in the cab for 5 minutes? Where am I? I was just obviously very confused with space and time. And it wasn't really good necessarily to be out and about walking around so confused. But this is part of the learning and the adaptation. It's not wrong to do that, but it can be adapted and learned from. So here we are in stage A, which is draft. So the theme is harvest, like harvest, practice, embody. And so level 1, we've already talked about documenting, and it's just creating a big bank of meaning. If one talks about things on videos, you can download, you can get your transcripts, you can turn it into poems, you can turn it into books, you can turn it into blog posts. So, or you can just erase it. It's whatever you want. And then level 2 is the harvest template. And it's just, well, I'll talk more. It's about experience, information, categories. And then level 3 is the 6 dimensions and 9 lattices, which are kind of like lifelong learning interests. So here's the harvest, here's my harvest template, and it's in the handout. A blank one's in the handout, but not to get stuck on my categories, but it just means that the information chaos and everything, when we give ourselves permission to unfold and explore, we see that there's different categories. There's different categories, you know, some are practical, some are dreams, some are, and so just knowing there's different categories allows it to go from a ball of chaos to some kind of categorization. And again, the point of level 1 and the process isn't categories at all, but having a sense of that can be really helpful to make sense of things. So here's the blank one, and you know, the idea of like practical stuff, information and stories, learning, creativity, action. And so signs and symptoms can actually fuel and be transformed into creativity, strengths, and skills. So for example, when ChatGPT first came out, I started to have all these like prophecies and like visions of how things might unfold in the future. And I started writing them down, and I started having some self-dialogue about it. And I spontaneously started talking about them as movie script scenarios. And by just changing that frame from like, this could happen in the future, to this big unknown, to something known, a known container. And then from there, you know, I downloaded a course, and I intend it might take 10 or 20 years to one day write a movie script based on some of those things. So now, like, you know, quote, paranoia or prophecy can be movie script scenarios. And maybe that's how some of the cool psychological thrillers are made. And here's I wrote the 6 dimensions and 9 lattices in the abstract, but it's really unique to each individual, I think. For me, these are my essential learnings. And like, I want to bridge information science with perception and biology, as well as like linguistics. There's so much that happens with bipolar quote and language stuff, as well as action, you know, like embodied cognition, working memory, things like that. And Gaiaence, which is Gaia plus science, which means there's other ways of knowing things. And that's one of the reasons why I can channel special messages, right? So learning about these things. And when anyways, here's the blank template for that, also in the handout, to make one's own 6 dimensions and 9 lattices. Like, someone might be really interested in technology or art, and the history and the future and the different consciousnesses that create different art. So there's a lot of different things that might be bridging to the person's unique experience. So stage B, we're just going to talk about it here, which is practice. So all those other ones we talked about in stage A, they're all draft, harvest, information, just, you know, channeling it, getting it through. And then this is about level 4 is about traits, projects, gigs, and space design as well. So the stuff that has been dialogued about can start to translate into projects. And as we do projects, and also through the dialogue, we start to see that we have these traits, and everyone has traits, but more and more we will be able to unfold and see distinctions. And also, like I said, this whole thing isn't linear. So like, I don't have to wait until I'm at this like imaginary stage B to think about my traits and or to start projects. And gigs is like another way to do a little bit of work with different projects, like say Fiverr or driving for Uber, for example, like micro work instead of having that pressure to get some like full-time job. And then space design, just being aware of one's space and how it can influence one's creativity, especially since a lot of this happens in flow. And then level 5 is about strengths, skills, and roles. So with roles, I brainstormed 152 future roles. And I don't know if anyone else has heard when it's said in the news that, oh, the top 5 jobs of today didn't exist 5 years ago. Well, if that's true, and I have a mission or a vision or whatever it is that I see that I'm doing, then I need to decide and craft and declare my role, because nobody's going to hand that to me on a silver platter. It's up to me. And so with all the stuff before this, before in quotes, I can start to think about what roles that I'm playing. And it's not just one role, you can play many roles, and you can try them on and reality test them. And then level 6 is the extasography. I made up this word, and it's hopefully to replace the pathography, which is, you know, the narrative of illness. And the extasography is, you know, the story of one's ecstasy and ecstatic experiences. And that's not to say that there aren't bad ones, but there's a lot of focus on that, and there's a lot of help on that. So the good parts, unfolding that. And the ecstasis vitae is like one's ideal resume that might go with the roles. So once we see what roles we might want to play, we can see how that extrapolates to our ecstasis vitae. And it can be as creative as you want. And it might be something that comes in handy in the future when traditional work is less and less a thing as technology amps up. And so here's an example of extasography here. This photo, I was sitting in the basement of where I lived at the time, and I felt this calling. I wasn't words, it was just like almost a magnetism. So I went outside, I look around, I couldn't see anything. I see these clouds forming. So I go to the back of the house, and then this creature in the clouds formed. And to me, it looks like Gaia with the eye and the nose and the head. And you know, it's not so much the formation as the timing of it, right? And the being literally called out just outside just to take that photo. And so I think, to me, this is Gaia and Mother Nature. And it only, in my mind, formed because of the relationship I'd built with Gaia. Like I said, with self-dialogue, it's not really talking to oneself. It's talking with something. It's talking with that extraordinary state. And, you know, I also call it Gaialogue, really, because you can talk with nature. So this time I was with a friend, and I was talking about how nature can hear us, or nature appreciates human attention. And there's studies about that, like plants appreciating like growing better when people sing to it or whatever. And I said, even these clovers appreciate our attention, like almost get happy when we look at them, when the human energy of the gaze is on them. She stops, she crouches down, and she said, "What's this?" And it was a 5-leaf clover. Here it is right now. I probably didn't dry it properly, but I still have it. Yeah, so to me, that was a direct response. And it also speaks to how, like, after all of that dialogue within myself, I met this person who was also open to that type of thing and participated in finding the clover after I spoke it. So it can become a shared ecstasis. You know, they talk about shared psychosis or whatever it's called, but a shared ecstasis. And as we build this meaning, we can perhaps be able to share it more. And that's part of the challenge, is like to get to that place where people are able to listen. And so traits research. So here's a study, positive traits in the bipolar spectrum, the space between madness and genius. Tiffany Greenwood, it's a great study. It says current practice in psychiatry is geared more towards controlling the symptoms of bipolar disorder rather than an understanding of a patient's true needs and potential capabilities. And, you know, my comment now is I can understand my true needs and capabilities the best. And then positive traits of spirituality, empathy, creativity, realism, and resilience are frequently observed in bipolar individuals. The study was done in 2016. I was in the psych ward in 2019. Nobody told me that. So these wonderful studies, they still take a long, long time to get into the clinical side of things. And that's why I like to go directly to the studies myself. By gaining a better appreciation for the positive aspects of mental illness and exploring methods to enhance these traits, we may improve clinical outcomes. So she's saying this study, that's what clinical stuff needs to do too. But I couldn't wait. Again, I couldn't wait. So I started something to do myself, to take it on myself. And then getting back to the creative accomplishment. So in 2020, all of a sudden I had this other download. I wrote another 720 pages out like that. It was a lot more coherent, and it turned into 2 books so far. And the 6 dimensions and 9 lattices actually are the other 6 books that I may or may not write, because books seem to be not as relevant, but I'll still use the information somehow, because there was enough for that many books there, really. And then here's the call back to Will Hall. So he gave me a testimonial, or a blurb, I guess, for my first book, A Wonderful Personal Exploration of Tremendous Growth Potential Found Within Mysterious States of Consciousness Called Mania and Bipolar. We Need Her Vital Perspective. That's just a point that the virtuous cycle that can happen when we give ourselves permission and go into the meaning, even if we only can do that within ourselves. And then we'll find that when we can do that with someone else, and we will, and we can, there'll be even more fruits from that. So here's stage C, D, and E. These are in the draft stage still. And stage C is the embodied theme, right? And stage D is more about co-creativity and finding your star quality and your genius as you've done all this. And then stage E is about, quote, reverse inclusion, which means, once we've gotten to this co-creativity and this embodiment, we're going to want to find ways to share this extraordinary with other people, which is their extraordinary. Oh, and here's another quick video. It's like, might be 2 minutes. It's a little bit of a spoken word thingamajig, and it's a draft.
It's your human right to be your own light, to fulfill, direct, learn, through your inner fires burn, shine intra-subjectively, consulting implicit directory, a life sentence of sentences, other absorbed pretenses, how to mend the fences? Burn them down, spark, catalyze, with your sound, with your eyes, strip disguise, tongue truth, close gap, bridge source, purse rich lips, absurd words, faster than thought. We live in it, as it, of it, with it, from it. Don't dumb it down. The chaos and entropy gives rise to a new entity. You are the map and the lamp. Through your gaze the world is amped. Insights to document. Keep going, you mustn't lament. A harvest template to contemplate. 6 levels and 9 lattices to debate. Okay, you've sketched out the first stage. You're well on your way to becoming a sage. What's next? What can you do with all this context? Practice projects with tickled traits, giggling gigs and dreams. See, and it is so you stitch what seems. Symptoms, ills, now strengths and skills. Dice roll in your favor despite the pills. Design your place, make a little space to practice gesture and flow's embrace. Ecstasis vitae, ectasography. Crowding out the pathography, higher levels yet to go, still some guts we have to grow. To leverage liberation, reality test, regame to step into our vocation, and magnetize truth from the lies, and reveal the world underneath the disguise.
I made a longer one and I just kind of clipped it. That's why it was glitchy, but I made that when I was making this presentation, because I made one based on my book, and I'm like, I'm just going to make a spoken word based on this, and just getting into it. Oops. Yeah, so on the platform, I put I call it a spark sheet because I feel like we have sparkers, right? And then that it has an activity listed to try Re-Uncovery by re-uncovering one of the presentations that you went to, as well as references, and then other bridges. And then my link tree is Bipolar Game Changer. And I have lots of different stuff on there. And also, I think, yeah, there's a mini little, quote documentary that I put on there. I think it's 44 minutes. So it has more like self-dialogue as an example. And also, I put all my self-dialogues on Spotify as a podcast in quotes. It's not really a podcast. Actually, I made one friend from it. He said when he was having troubles, he would listen to it when he was falling asleep. I'm glad I put him to sleep. And he said it made him feel somewhat better. So we're friends, even though we've never met. And that's really what I look for with this, is just like being synchronous, right? Going into the qualities of that extraordinary state. And also, I'm going to be doing some writing on Substack, as well as I'm going to hopefully create a course at some point. So my link tree will have that linked whenever that happens. And my dream actually is to create a festival in 2027 for us all to go and be in our extraordinary nature together. And also, I had this idea to have a directory of people with lived experience courses, because the other presentations I watched, everyone had a course, and I'm actually going to take all of them in the coming months. And that's some of the science I read. And yeah, anyways, I'm just being silly. And what else? Yeah, I guess that's the end of it.